Hey man, how you doing?
We're back.
Once again. So what's going on there? Cut to his close-up.
Oh,
You
God.
got
I
a
was
little.
going to say avoid my close-up as much as possible. Yeah, a little
I
workout
popped ya.
injury.
Yeah, right.
My Pilates instructor is getting violent.
You pissed me off and I popped you.
No, that was Rob.
Oh yeah, exactly. All right, today, wow. You know I've been waiting for this one.
Yep.
This is
It's actually a part two, in a way.
kind of a part two, yeah. So we've got Dan Sandeen, and a lot of our viewers are not going to have any idea who he is, but they're going to know the things that he did, what they created. Because when you look at your iPhone, when you look at any kind of computer graphic or image or art, this man is the one that helped us get there. So let's introduce him right now. Dan Sandeen. How you doing, man?
I'm doing fine. How you doing?
I'm doing great. And I want to introduce Rachel.
Right, I was just about to jump in.
So this is Rachel from Arizona. She is our, oh God, I'm going to do this again. Digital marketing,
Media director.
manager, director.
That'll work. That'll
She
all
does it
work.
all.
No worries
We
there.
love her, so she's
Hi,
fine with
everybody.
it.
Welcome to the show. I am following the chat on Facebook, so if you have any questions for Stephen, Jens, or Dan as we go, please pop them in the chat. I'll make sure we talk about them. Most of what we're talking about today is really new to me as well, so I'm excited to learn. Let's go.
All right, Dan.
Yes.
Here's the interesting thing. You don't know me and I don't know you, but I was one of the crazy people that came out of Center for New TV. It's funny because when you talk about this sort of, I don't want to say club, but this movement, it's like the French New Wave of video art between, I would say, what, 1975, 1985, in that range. You were with your pals doing it, but I was over at Center for New TV doing it, and it was just this feeling that I can't describe that was like we were experimenting. How do you describe that?
It was a wonderful time, and there were people doing video stuff from all sorts of different goals and directions. There were people that were interested in using it for political organization, for community organization and political effect. There were people that are interested in trying to give people a voice. You have at that time period, the big networks were completely dominant, and the only way you could get your messages out was to somehow work through them. And so there were a lot of people working on alternative ways to be able to get their message out in video. And strangely enough, during that time period, the equivalent of Comcast and stuff were actually almost radical organizations that had a community outreach facilities. So there was an opportunity if people could produce stuff to actually get it out. And it was a wonderful time.
It was. And I want to roll a video clip because essentially you've done a lot of things, and we're going to start at the beginning. I want to talk about photography a little bit, but let's jump in with this device that you created that people need to know about called an image processor. And they had one at the Center for New TV. They had one at Columbia College, and I didn't really go to Columbia College, but I've used both of them. And let's roll his clip so you can see what this device is that he built.
Because color is much more fun than black and white, we run cables over this way to a very colorful person, Dan Sandeen, inventor of the image processor.
For instance, the comparator, which is this unit here, I'm now running a signal from the camera input into the comparator and then into this output module. And if I switch to the process signal, you see something like a Codalith turned all black and white, except that I can very easily adjust the gray level at which that transition is made. Function generator, which I will transfer to now. And with that, you see I can adjust the continuous transfer gray levels. There's the white area, middle gray area, and black area. A value scrambler, which is this module here, I'm patching in here and out here, and I'll turn to that process. What that does is divide the value region up into 8 separate value regions. And I have independent control out of each one of those value regions. So I'm going down now and adjusting them from white to black, or playing with them from white to black. Which is the adder multiplier, and this allows for very simple combinations of images, more snapshots, more or less, what I've been up to with the color IP.
Cool stuff.
So first off, it looks like the moon landing kind of equipment there. But essentially what Dan's done, and I'm going to let him explain it, is why don't you pull that diagram up that we have? But there's these various boxes, you know, that he's created. And what you did was, by running your video from one box to another box and then changing modulations and going to another one and another one, you could create all these interesting effects. And Dan, I'm going to let you kind of explain it a little better than I just did.
So, that's correct. It's a modular video synthesizer, and it's actually, there are two main inspirations for its design. One was the Moog Model 2 audio synthesizer, which operated in the same way, where you had modules that would produce particular effects, particular modifications of the sounds, particular sound qualities, and then routing the audio signals like a big patch panel. So it was one of the major influences. Another major influence was a general purpose analog computer. At the time, digital computers really weren't fast enough to solve a bunch of problems, and it was done in the analog domain, and it looked very much like the IP. There were things that could multiply, things that could divide, things that could integrate, things that could differentiate it, and you would actually simulate complex physical systems by patching cables together. So those are the two main influences. And so although it does do special effects, it really was designed to be a kind of comprehensive video production facility that would replace most of a TV studio. So with a Portapack camera and the IP, you could have a huge range of capability without having a whole TV studio, which was the model of the time.
Well, the interesting thing is the way that we used to use it at Center for New TV is we had a 3/4-inch deck, and we would run the video out of the deck, and we would go into like your solarizer, and then out of that thing into another thing, and then out of that thing into another thing, and create these sort of wacky effects. And then we would lay it off to another tape, which kind of sucked because that was going down a generation. And I mean, he's nodding, but the rest of the people are like, generations
What's
mean,
a generation?
Yeah, what's a generation? But so then we would take
It's not perfect.
what?
Copying is now perfect. It didn't used to be perfect to copy. Every time you copied, it got worse.
I know. So then sometimes I would take the tape out of the layoff and put the layoff in the source machine. These are words, again, that people don't probably get. And then I would do it again, and I'd go down 2-3 generations, and then I would edit that into my show. Were other people doing it the same way?
Yeah, there's a bunch of styles there. I tended not to do multiple passes because I didn't like the loss of quality. I mean, to tape, multiple passes to tape. So I pretty often would try to have, multiple feeds at the same time. Was one technique. Of course, synchronizing incoming video signals was an issue, so that meant kind of one tape recorder and some cameras live, typically, although time-based correctors did eventually become obtainable. They weren't, so that's the way I operated. Another kind of method I operated was to have materials coming in and record a kind of baseline, and then come back with new materials and do insert edits, which would overwrite sections of tape. So I'd build up without needing multiple generations of tape. But what you describe is a typical production process.
Well, what I think people need to realize is that, now we just, you're in this computer and you can create any kind of colorization and all this stuff. But at that time, there was zero way to alter your video. And what's so unique about what Dan made here is that you could do keying, and which it sounds again like nothing, and it sounds like we're going back into the Stone Age. But what you can do in your iPhone 15 times more powerfully than what you could do in that IP, but it was a different look. There was something analog about it. And I want to show you something. Like my footage, like I said, is on 3/4-inch tape, and I can't seem to find it. But I have my wife's footage, and she was a student of yours, Lucy Voitas. I don't know if you remember her at Columbia?
Yes.
You remember her?
Yes.
How could you forget?
Yeah, really. Okay, let's throw up some of her footage and you can take a peek at it.
I'm gonna hide this tape when I'm finished.
Look, McCready, I've been thinking. If a small particle of this thing is enough to take over an entire organism.
Now there's a key effect. What do you think?
1980, early 80s.
Early 80s.
Yeah.
Nice. Nice. I like it.
Yeah. I mean, it was student stuff and they were experimenting, but you know, it was that time when you just tried stuff. You go on.
Let me ask a practical question. So back in those days, maybe even a little earlier, what were the practical and commercial uses of it? How were people starting to use it, commercially?
There were a few people who used the IP in combination with other devices to actually generate advertisements and process things that ended up on TV. But at least within the community of IP users here, it was typically kind of idiosyncratic art production, which then would be, or live performances. I think another element is that there was a lot of live performance work because it was a real-time instrument, and going to tape always cost quite a bit in quality, so that you would have inputs from several cameras, and then combine those inputs and process them and colorize them, and then put them out on monitors, which then the audience would be looking at these monitors and people on the stage producing the stuff. And that was a fairly common model too, that didn't actually involve distributing tape.
Well, yeah, you just made me think of something that I completely haven't thought about for like 30 years, which is video installations. Do you remember when Ken Saunders and Mike English, I don't know if you remember Mike English, he was also at Columbia College, and they would do like what kids today would call like a live poetry reading, where they would have monitors like stacked up and there would be video elements, and a lot of that was done through the IP. Remember these sort of video installations?
Yeah, right. And some of them were kind of installations that didn't have a live operator, that people would just sit down in front of, and because anything in the IP could be controlled by voltages, there would be a set of sliders and joysticks and knobs, and people would mess around with either their own image or mess around with stuff that was being fed in from outside. So they were really kind of standalone installations. And then there were others that were more performance-oriented, where someone was controlling the IP and changing cables and turning dials directly on the IP. But yeah, the video installations were really wonderful, could be wonderful events.
You know, I mean, you kind of have pioneered quite a few things in your life here. I just want to kind of get at one or two other ones. This idea of your distribution religion, which I would kind of call open source now. I mean, is that the same kind of term where you basically, why don't you explain it?
Well, right. It was Phil Morton was the poster child for being able to express that really well. And he said, copy it right. Well, first of all, this was a community of people producing this stuff, and there was a lot of sharing going on. And there was a lot of power in not holding on to things and trying to control them, but just letting them go out. And so it is kind of like the open source movement, or just putting things out without excessive copyright controls. And that had an amplifying effect, where if you tried to hold on to that stuff, you just wouldn't grow as fast. And also there was the feeling you could just keep producing this stuff better and better and better and better. The tech was changing fast. Your skill level was changing fast, much like being an art student. So the sensible thing to do was just do the stuff and get it out there and make it as unencumbered as possible. The other part about the IP was kind of an open source hardware project where Phil Morton and I spent a year of Friday afternoons working on building. He really built his own copy, but we worked together on documenting his process of building a copy. So there was a large 80 or 100 page document that complete with parts lists that you could order from Newark about if you wanted to build a copy of this thing, we tried to support it as as much as we could. So it was kind of an open source hardware project.
Let's pull up some of the pictures of these various different image processors, because this is amazing. This looks like something out of the 1940s. I love this picture. So I mean, go on.
Late 70s, I would guess.
Yeah, it's great. I mean, so look at how many different cables you got going there. You are patching in and out of all these different modules, and let's talk about what some of these modules are. So, yeah, I know I kind of remember some of the terms. There was like a solarizer, a polarizer, a key type device. What were all these modules? And let's run through some of the pictures while we're talking about it.
Okay, so one of the most important modules is called the adder multiplier, and that, by the way, I'd love to have a copy of that picture.
Okay, we'll send it to you.
With the adder multiplier, and if you add two images together, again, this is the influence from general purpose analog computation. If you add two images together, that's equivalent to superimposition. The multiply component of that module is if you multiply two images together, then you get a key style effect. And so there were a lot of those, and that's how you partially controlled the routing in real time, was by having images control other images. And then of the processing modules, which you went through the three basic ones in the excerpt of the 5-minute romp, the was something that you called it a solarizer, and that's a good name for it. It's the technical name coming from the compute community as a function generator. And then there was the thing that I called the value scrambler there, which is modern effect is called posterization. And it's a kind of like a quantifier. It divides things up, a classifier it's called, because it divides things up into separate regions of gray value, and you can process them differently. And then the differentiator, which is kind of extracted edges, which you could use to sharpen images or produce outline kinds of effects. And the reason there were so many cables is that you could enable a whole bunch of different processes and then fade from one to another in a continuous way, so that at any given time there might only be a few video paths, 2 or 3 video paths going out, but then by turning dials and causing other parts of the IP to be connected, to be mixed into the output, then you could have a large variety of effects that you could control in real time.
Now, what about video games? So the early video games, how did this work affect what we saw like in the Ataris and the early video games?
Well, again, it was a part of the same community of people, and especially the hackers that were kind of building their own personal computers at that time, and that was the same community of electronic designers in a sense. That was what I would have probably described myself as I was building this analog image processor. There are another number of times where these threads came together. One was here in Chicago with the Bally Corporation. We worked on making sure that their video game technology was NTSC compliant, so then we could plug their video games into our video production. In fact, we used the Bally Arcade and a later device called the Datamax UV1 as kind of our character generator and our kind of graphic art generator within our art practice, and in some cases when we were doing live stuff, in the cable TV system. So again, it was part of a community, and it worked all the way. We took the outputs of video game technology and put it into video, and then part of working with Bally Corporation and stuff, I designed stuff that allowed you to get video signals into the video game apparatus so that people could process images. And we produced kind of specialized real-time computer graphics systems that just were not available in any other technology.
All right, I want to move into the future a little bit, not the future, but a little more forward in time. Let's roll this next clip and then we'll go from there.
Between 1975 and 1980, there were a series of live video computer performance events at the University of Illinois at Chicago. The first was the Interactive Electronic Visualization event in 1975, followed by EVE 2 in 76 and EVE 3 in 78. During this period, there were a total of 5 performances of Spiral, the last of which is Spiral 5, called Spiral PTL for perhaps the last. What follows is a document of the performance of Spiral 1 at the first EVE event. It was performed in April 1975.
Cool. So after the IP, then what? Then what'd you start working on?
Well, the IP and the stuff you saw there is that Tom DeFonte, my chief compatriot in many crimes, came to UIC in '73, and we started to combine the computer graphics technology of the time with video processing technology, which is you saw in the last video excerpt. And then that moved into the more digital. First of all, that computer was a hybrid computer. The PDP-11 was a modern computer by its design, but all the graphics was done in analog. All the perspective projects and rotations and were all done by matrix multiplication in the analog domain. So it was really a hybrid machine. And then, of course, as digital computers became more powerful, I'd like to point out that the IP, in terms of its processing power, could do more floating point operations than the Cray 1 at the time, which was the most powerful supercomputer at the time. However, the flops were much floppier. They were only, probably 6 bits of information and not, 16 bits or 32 bits of information. But in terms of data throughput, those analog instruments were more powerful than any digital instruments at the time in terms of real-time processing. But then digital technology started to move again. There was a period when the holographic displays, the kind of display that was used there for the live events, became outmoded by the frame buffer. The problem became that the frame buffer had too much memory. Computers couldn't shuffle it fast enough. So really, computer graphics stopped being real time and stopped moving. The only way to make stuff move was animation, where you would spend a half hour computing a frame, assembling it into a movie and stuff. Except for the video games industry, because they were committed to some kind of real-time interaction, and that was really the reason that we got working with video games, was they did something in real time. Now, in the late '80s, then digital computing started to get fast enough to do things in real time again, with the Reality Engine by Silicon Graphics. Allowed us to get back into having digital computation instead of analog computation do our image processing work.
Okay, let's start talking about the cave a little bit.
Okay, so in the late '80s, Tom and I got very interested in the idea of doing virtual reality, and like now, at that time, virtual reality, everybody thought it meant a head-mounted display. But we were sitting around. I can remember one morning said that, could we do virtual reality based with projectors at the time? And I'd been working in auto stereo and some stuff with Ellen Sandor in Art to the Nth, and it was very clear to me that the mathematical projections necessary to do VR on external panels like the ones surrounding me now could maintain all the important effects of virtual reality, but get the display off the head. And so we developed in 1992, we developed the Cave, which was a rear projection cube that did real-time computer graphics in stereo and also knew where the people's eyes were so that it could give them their own view of the world, which is an important aspect of virtual reality.
I think we have a couple of pictures with the glasses, actually. Let's see if you can find them or not. They're in the computer somewhere. So let me ask you a question. Oh, here we go. I mean, it's kind of like what's going on today, but like a very early predecessor of that.
Well, it is the same stuff that's going on today. It simply is the same stuff. There's both head-mounted displays and panel-based displays that do virtual reality. The only thing that's changed is the numbers. The resolutions have gone up, the frame rates have gone up, the graphic qualities have gone up, but it's all the same stuff that's been going on since the late '80s. In fact, the first head-mounted display that demonstrated all of virtual reality's properties was done in 1965 by Ivan Sutherland, and So it's really, there's our threads that go way back. And you hear about it when there certain are essentially economic opportunities where the price performance ratios of these devices become good enough to actually be useful to people. And that's happened in various waves, depending on the community of people that it's addressing.
So what's going on behind you there?
Well, so I'm doing this Skype from the Cave 2. I decided it was a lot more interesting in my office, which is, about 100 feet from here. And what's going on right now is a virtual reality art piece called Particle Dreams in Spherical Harmonics is its full name.
Let me ask you a question. Do you consider yourself an artist or a inventor?
Or an engineer, or a computer scientist.
Or a physicist?
Or a physicist. My academic training is in nuclear physics. I consider myself all of these things. And I think there's a stereotype that somehow, artists can't think and scientists can't feel, or something that's nearly as bad as that. But it's just not true. There are people operate in these spectrums, and art has always had a technical aspect. Photography is one of the most obvious examples. But ceramics at one time was cutting edge technology. And so artists have always been involved in the technology that they need to produce the communications they want to produce. And many artists are extremely competent in the technologies that they want to use. And for the invention of virtual reality for itself, had many artists involved in it to produce it besides me. I mean, the original head-mounted displays. Jaron Lanier was, of course, an important person in the field, and he's trained as a composer and musician. And other people, because they had graphic needs and graphic goals, and so they became part of these inventions. They became part of the development of the technology itself, as I have.
So Dan, I got a question for you. So a lot of our viewers, maybe many of them want to try some of this or play around with it, and maybe a lot of them can digitally somehow. But I saw in an interview someplace you talking about the importance of being able to do it analog and put your hands on dials. Me and Steve love dials because it's tactile. It's a way for you to interact with these devices in a more direct way. You want to elaborate on that for me?
Yeah, it's very clear that modern digital computers, especially at the level of gaming laptops for that matter, or towers full of graphics cards, have the compute power to do anything that the analog IP could do, and do it in HD and 10 bits, and at the kind of qualities that we're used to now. The digital power is there, but the way you control them is quite different. And you can, of course, by using MIDI controllers, largely artists that do some of this stuff live digitally use essentially MIDI controllers, sliders and dials and musical instruments to feed signals into them and to control the digital processing. But there is still something that is still not as good an interface as the original IP, where, spread out before you were the things in space. And you would look at that knob and you would know that that's going to be the gray value of the dancer. And you look over here at this knob and that's going to cause, the image to kind of like fade from one thing to another. And it's like playing a musical instrument, and you have it spread out in space. And I don't think that interface has ever been recreated as well, although there are lots of good subsets of it that people are using now to accomplish the same goal. I mean, there's this whole community of people that do live stuff with bands, kind of like the old light shows with rock bands that I also was involved in, in the 60s, of doing these kind of live. We use slide projectors and optical manipulators to produce stuff on screens. And there's a large community of these people doing it, and they have a whole bunch of kind of radical input devices, and so that this whole thing is still like the same kind of thing that's going on with the IP is still very live in a number of communities in the hybrid form, where there's some analog and some digital computation going on.
We've got a question here from Moses who says, I know that many people use the processor in artistic applications and installations. Have you ever been approached by people interested in therapeutic applications, or what are your thoughts on it, like meditation and music therapy?
Well, that certainly was a good part of the thought, in the 70s, while the IP was a brand new instrument. And, and also it was a time when there was a lot of interest in mysticism and religion of the kind of less institutional sort. And so as a matter of fact, even at that time, there was a lot of interest in trying to do biofeedback and brainwave monitoring, which always turned up to be, scalp muscles because of the technology of the time. But, people sat there and control things in kind of non-traditional ways. And yeah, I think yes, but I do think the right technology to do that now is digital, and it's like cell phones and head-mounted displays and TV sets and stuff like that, because that's the material that the modern world is actually made out of. And I think there was a lot of that. There was a lot of interest of that even in the 70s and 80s when this stuff was all new.
Yeah, I actually had a question earlier when I was reading your bio yesterday about. There was a note here. Let me pull it up. With the Cave 2, which was a cylindrical display, is that something that that people would stand inside of?
But we're in it right now. So that's the Cave here. And yes, you get up and you walk around. It's like 20 feet in diameter, and you can control things.
Just like the holodeck.
It
is
the holodeck.
Yeah, well, especially the cube, when the classic cave, that's where everybody thought it was the holodeck, but of course it doesn't have force feedback.
Mm-hmm.
So wait a minute, you're seeing this in 3D?
Yeah.
Oh wow, can we come by? Where are you?
I'd like to see it.
Well, we're, at the corner of Taylor and Halstead.
Oh.
University of Illinois, Chicago.
Not far. Jens and I are going to visit you. We want to check this out. It is really cool.
The shot is really quite interesting because you're silhouetted on the background. It's quite poignant.
It is a great shot. Put it up full screen. I want to see this.
Okay. Here.
We got to thank you, man. This was such a great honor to sit and talk to you, and we really I had a terrific time. I don't know about you, Jens, but it was such a pleasure to have you on this show, man. Thank you so much.
It's a pleasure. It's fun. And I had a great time just setting up and kind of getting the tech to work. And the other thing is, if you just, on YouTube, a lot of the videotapes are available in my YouTube channel. All you do is search YouTube Dan Sandin, and there's a whole bunch of videotape that you can watch there from the 70s, 80s, and documents of my work in virtual reality.
All right, well, we're going to turn it over to Rachel to finish out.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Thank you. Thank you, Dan. This was a trippy episode. This was a lot of fun. So thank you to our guests, and thank you to everybody for watching. Thank you to ICANN, who provide all the lighting for our show, and to our sponsor, Rode Mics. Just a reminder about our holiday gift boxes, which run through the end of December. You can get free gifts from us and Kessler, ICANN, and Hawkwoods for buying Zacuto gear before December 31st. Go to zacuto.com to get all the information. On next week's show, we will be talking storytelling in historical pieces with playwright Bill Spatz. That's Wednesday, December 12th at 11 a.m. CST. We'll see you there. Bye-bye.